Everyone, good morning, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. Thank you for joining us today. Um, and we are super excited to talk to you about ARM templates, Project Bicep, and some of the future-looking things that we're doing in the deployment and infrastructure as code space. To just set agenda, I want to spend time today to share with you kind of what we've accomplished in the last 6 to 9 months. And a huge thanks to all of you for contributing, helping us prioritize. Alex will spend some time talking about the roadmap of where we're heading, what are some of the next milestones for Bicep. And Brian will come and talk about a new area that we're looking at around stacks, about really improving the deployment lifecycle, the environment lifecycle. So we'll spend some time with that. Angel will also talk about some of the new learning modules that we have done to help customers who are looking to learn about ARM templates as well. And then finally, as Priya mentioned, we'll have 15 minutes to just take questions as they come along as well. And so, for those of you who just joined, one thing I want to set expectations is we're not going to do a Bicep demo today. There's a YouTube video of the Bicep MVP session we did last week, so you guys can watch that. Somebody asked if that is NDA content. It is not NDA content. I just made it unlisted for now. I will make it publicly available at the end of this session so that you guys can share as well. But one of my asks to you is I would love to have all of you actually try out Bicep and create 5-minute videos about what you think, tips and tricks for the community. That is something I want you guys to also participate in. So please do that. Alex, could we flip? So we have a whole bunch of us on the call today from the product team. You saw Alex, Angel, Brian, myself, Vlad, who's our manager as well, is on the call. One of the asks is we're here to answer questions for you. So if you have a question, my request is to use #question so that so the moderators that are scanning through the chat window, we know what's a question and what's a feedback or an acknowledgement. So if you could use #question, that would be super helpful. This way it'll be easy for the moderators to kind of look at the question and answer them as well. So thanks for that. So, I wanted to spend some time really talking about what we've accomplished in the last 6 to 9 months. I thought the team has done a phenomenal job, and so wanted to kind of share a little bit of information around that. So one thing is, today 70% of all resources created declaratively, right? So your declarative tools in Azure include ARM templates, Terraform, Pulumi, Ansible, Puppet and Chef. 70% of those resources created in Azure today are done by ARM templates. And this number has stayed consistent for the last 6 months. So it's actually grown a few percentage as well. And internally, all your deployments that are done for all the services that are created in Azure, we have an orchestration engine called EV2. I think you guys saw a demo of that or some talks around that. But EV2 essentially uses ARM templates to go and provision a lot of the infrastructure as well. So we keep getting asked this question on Twitter, why do you guys continue to bet on ARM templates and why are we making improvements? I think, my feedback is, we love customers to choose whatever tool they're comfortable with, but I have 70% of all resources created in Azure done via ARM templates. And so we have a commitment to make sure our customers are successful on our platform, right? And so that is something that not many people realize is the usage of ARM templates in Azure today by external customers. And so that is a big focus for us. The other thing that we're super excited about is the ARM Tools VS Code extension. So we've really helped with authoring ARM templates. So we added support for IntelliSense, syntax highlighting, snippets. Huge thanks to Sam Kogan for contributing all his snippets from his tool into this VS Code extension. One thing that's pretty crazy is we are close to about 20,000 daily active users using the ARM Tools VS Code extension. So that's been pretty phenomenal, the usage that we have over there. And I think it's funny. I think you've spoken to some other customers as well. One of the things that actually customers feel that we do better than even Terraform is the VS Code extension. They think our VS Code extension is actually one of a really, really good experience that even outshines Terraform in that sense. So we're pretty excited about it. We actually have a team. The VS Code team actually authors the VS Code extension as well. So we have some of the best experts working on this extension, which is really great. Another big one is we always get feedback around, visualizing your templates. We have the armviz.io site that is, excuse me, that is really good. But customers wanted to visualize these templates in their VS Code extension. And so Ben Coleman, who's a Microsoft employee, has published this really, really cool ARM template visualizer. So it's one of the most downloaded extensions as well. And so super grateful for the work that he's done and contributed. The other two key things that we heard from customers is we released the public preview of the what if capability. So one of the asks that we got from customers is they like to see what is the impact of a template deployment without actually having to deploy that template into, say, a sandbox environment, right? And so what if is this really nice feature which allows you to do this pre-deployment impact assessment. And we're seeing some huge customers, General Motors for one, who's using it pretty heavily, and they really, really loved it. And so we are pretty excited about it. Alex will talk a little bit about what are some of the next steps for us to get to GA and what are some of the other improvements that we have coming down the pipeline as well. The other big capability that we released as a public preview is deployment scripts, where you can run a PowerShell or Bash script as part of your ARM template, or you can reference it from an external source. And really, deployment scripts was to help ensure that you can complete those last mile scenarios, right? So when you're provisioning an Azure environment, you might want to create a security group or a user in AAD or the SPNs. What a lot of customers had to do is they either had to go and use automation and string up a bunch of runbooks or run a bunch of PowerShell scripts to set up the environment. But now we actually take all that logic and put it inside your template, right? And so the template handles all that logic. And we do this in a really nice, clean fashion because when we execute the template, we'll stand up an ACI container in your subscription. We'll go and run these data plane operations, and then we clean up that entire ACI container as well as all the scripts that ran as well. So we make it a really nice, clean experience. Number 6 is what we call tenant and management group level deployments. And this is really ensuring that there are certain resources, right? Like role assignments, policies, Azure Security Center, where you can deploy these resources at a tenant scope or management group scope or a subscription scope. The benefit of this is when you deploy these resources at those higher level scopes, any child resource groups or subscriptions under those scopes will inherit all the policies or role assignments, right? And so by having a way to deploy at those scopes makes it really easy for you to set up your tenant architecture. To accommodate for that, we also shipped an updated version of the Azure DevOps Stack. So the Azure DevOps Stack supports management group and subscription level deployments. And the other thing that's being hidden by Alex's toolbar at the bottom is really around a new GitHub action that the GitHub team has actually is owning as well, is a GitHub action to deploy your ARM templates as well. So really, really excited about some of these improvements that we brought to the platform. Alex, if you can flip. The other big area that we wanted to focus on is, we really wanted to improve what we call the fundamentals of the platform. So it's all nice and dandy that we're introducing a new language, but one of the things we know is, we wanted to ensure that the platform was really good. And when I mean the platform and the fundamentals, I'm talking about things such as error handling, right? We really wanted to focus on making sure that the error messages are really clear, right? So adding a line and position number, adding clear documentation. And so Angel, who's on the call today, Angel spent a lot of time with these RPs, making sure these error messages were really clear and actionable, making sure these error messages surfaced up, whether you're using the CLI, PowerShell, Portal, and giving you a consistent experience about these error messages. And so what's great about our team is, the work we're doing here also helps you. For example, if you use the CLI or if you use other third-party tools, you get the benefits of all these improvements that we're making with error handling, for example, right? So you get those same error messages that are very descriptive and actionable. And so a big focus has gone on how do we not only innovate, but also improve some of these core platform needs. The other thing that we worked on is we actually have a tool that auto-generates the schemas for all the resource types. And so this way, our templates are all based on the schemas that get generated for the resource providers. And so we made it really easy for all the RPs to now generate schemas for their resource providers as well. The other big one, again, this is those platform benefits that we're improving, is we increased a lot of the deployment limits, right? So we got rid of the 5 resource groups per deployment limit. I think we bumped it up to, you can do like 800 now to match the number of resources you can create. We also did auto pruning of the 800 deployment limit. So there's this always popular, you hit you exceeded the number of deployments you can do. We actually introduced a pruning job now so that you don't hit that 800 deployment limit as well. There were a lot of great Twitter feedback on this as well from Tom and the rest of the community. So we were super pumped about that. One of the things that a lot of our regulated customers continue to do is use blueprints. And we actually have a team, our own internal Azure compliance team, that's building some of these out-of-the-box blueprints. And so we had published last year ISO, SOC, HIPAA, NIST, a whole bunch of regulatory compliance blueprints. And we also shipped recently a Swift blueprint as well as a Zero Trust blueprint as well. And the Zero Trust blueprint is basically taking a lot of these security best practices and packaging them into a blueprint. And there's a pretty good blog article by Lily Kim, who's the partner director on these blueprints as well. So I'll post a link to that. The other big platform improvement that we did is focusing on reducing our time to deploy. So for creating 100 VMs, we reduced the time to deploy by 75%, right? And so that's another thing our team worked with on the platform side, is to really make sure that not only do we improve the deployment experience, but the time to deploy is super important as well. And so it was really great to see us being able to reduce that number down by 75%. And finally, I think, we got a lot of feedback from customers around being able to wanting to test their ARM templates, right? And so internally, we use the ARM template testing toolkit as a way for us to test our templates that get published in the Quick Start or the Marketplace. And so we actually open source that testing framework as well over here for the community as well. And so Brian Moore, who kickstarted this project, has been shepherding along, and I think it's a super, super useful way for customers to start testing their templates as part of their deployment process as well. Next one, Alex. So, my net is, I wanted to really just spend a few seconds thanking you guys for all your contributions and support. We wouldn't be here without you guys' support and feedback. And so a big thank you for all the feedback, and hopefully, we prioritize a lot of the things that you guys wanted us to focus on. One of the things I was super proud about, and we published a case study on, is how Xbox uses ARM templates to actually provision their environments, right? And so we have this really, really great case study about today Xbox receives about 7 million service requests. So these are customer requests, through, if you go through the Xbox experience, you can go and file a ticket, or you can call, you can send a chat. So they handle about 7 million of these different requests daily. And so they have a custom kind of experience that's integrated, that's running in Azure. And they essentially use ARM templates to create this whole application that handles all these requests, right? And so this app includes functions, Key Vault, a whole bunch of Azure services, but they actually deploy using ARM templates, and they actually update the whole environment using ARM templates. And so you can imagine what the scale and volume that they're dealing with. So I'll again post a link to this, but I really recommend checking out this article because there's a notion, there's a saying, you got to drink your own champagne, and I thought this is a great story about how we internally are drinking our own champagne, so to speak. Excellent.
Cool. So
actually,
you guys can hear me, right?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay. So we're going to go over a little bit of our current plans as well for kind of the next 3 to 6 months. Obviously, we open sourced the Project Bicep repo last week. We're really happy with how the launch went. A bunch of you wrote blog posts, so seriously, really thank you for doing that. It helped quite a bit. We presented to you guys last week, so we did a pretty deep dive overview into that. And Mark Rust is going to be showing it just for a couple minutes in his Ignite session, I think next week. Obviously, so right now we're looking for as much kind of feedback as possible, particularly on syntax changes where we might need to introduce breaking changes. That's kind of the best feedback we can get right now, because the earlier we do that, the better. As we do subsequent releases, we want to stabilize more. In terms of roadmap, I guess we're jumping from 1 to 3. The O.2, which we have scheduled for October 15th, we'll see how close we get to that date. Some of the big things that we're doing for that are IntelliSense and validation. So the O.1 is like really, really basic. It doesn't have any IntelliSense. It has really basic validation. We're going to start introducing the IntelliSense and validation that you've gotten used to in VS Code with the ARM tools extension, but we want to even go further than that. So there's a foundation there for a really good type system in Bicep, and we're going to start leveraging a lot of that with the O.2 release. And then modules are the other big one. If you haven't seen the spec for modules, maybe someone can grab that and put it in the chat, or I can do it afterwards. We want to ship modules in the O.2 release as well. And that's going to be a really exciting change where we can help you modularize your Bicep files and expose these modules to end users to really simplify their Bicep experience. And then with O.3, the goal is really to get to kind of one-to-one with what you can do in ARM templates so that you can really just start converting everything over. We're going to have a decompiler to help with that. And that's the point where we're going to start encouraging more production usage. We're going to stabilize a lot more around the O.3. It doesn't mean we won't ever make breaking changes, but we'll treat them a lot more seriously. So, you'll take that all into account if you do decide to take a production dependency at that time. In terms of everything else besides Bicep, there's still quite a bit going on. So the template specs private preview is happening right now. That's going to help you take your ARM templates and store them in Azure as a resource. We have PowerShell and CLI support available now. There's a portal redesign that's happening that'll be closer to our kind of public preview UX that should go out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And then we want to go public preview sometime in the middle of October. If you don't have access to the template specs private preview and you would like to get access, there is a form that you can fill out that I can also put in the chat after this, and we can get you onboarded this week. What if and deployment scripts, we're really focused on getting to GA in October. With the What If GA, the whole public preview has really been primarily about noise reduction. So continue to file issues in the GitHub repo where we track what if noise. We do take care of a couple of those every week. There's more there than we can do, but the plan for this is basically to get it to the individual RP teams to start fixing instead of us fixing them. And that's going to be a key priority for them. By the end of the year, there's going to be a metric where they will have to fix basically what if noise in addition to other Swagger specs, their API specs. They need to fix details of that definition, and that's a KPI that they're going to be tracked against. So they'll start being driven to fix those issues. And then we do want to support audit policy. Realistically, that's going to be a post-GA item, but we want to show you in the what if response any policy audits events that would be triggered. So this should be super helpful for people debugging on their own or testing their templates to make sure that they're compliant, not just with deny policies, but with audit policies as well. For deployment scripts, the main reason that we haven't GA'd yet is because we've wanted to implement basically this capability to allow us to use your token to create the deployment script and the underlying resources. So we'll no longer need the managed identity. It'll be optional. So if you do let us use your token instead, it'll help a lot with just having the right permissions and having less prerequisites to set up. We'll use that token to create ACI and storage for the deployment script, and you will not be logged in to any user context in the container. We don't have the capability to use your token there, but you can log in with an SPN, or if you're doing non-Azure operations, like doing Kubernetes deployments or something like that, you can forego the managed identity and it just becomes a lot easier to use. The ARM tools extension in VS Code, we're still obviously working on it. It's super important to us. So there's a new version pretty much every month, and there's lots of good stuff that they've added. There's much better linked and nested template support. There's really cool code lenses that have dropped recently, kind of tying together your parameters files and giving you other relevant context. There's IntelliSense that got added for the reference function. We're going to do the same for the depends on function. And then there's this new relative path property for ARM template. For template specs is where we introduced it. It's going to work outside of template specs as well. So we'll support that property in the extension. With blueprints, we have talked about this before, but we are planning to migrate the blueprint definition to template specs and then migrating the blueprint assignment, which is kind of that lifecycle piece, to stacks, which Brian will talk about in more depth in a second. We do want to GA blueprints in the first half of next year. What it means to GA blueprints basically means to GA a user experience for creating template specs in the portal. So the UX is still going to be there. All the built-ins are still going to be there. There's a lot of people that really enjoy that user experience and the composability there. So we're going to keep that running. We're going to GA it, but ultimately it will take a dependency on these core primitives of template specs and stacks. All the workflows will be the same. The features will be the same. So that's kind of the plan there. On the TTK, we have filled out all the different projects for our Iron plan. So if you go to the projects links, you can see what is involved in each stage of the release there. In terms of Bicep working with the TTK, we kind of wanted to break this down into two categories of things that the TTK does today. One is, what does the code say? Meaning literally how the code is written. So if you're using the concat function in the wrong place, or other things like that for how the code is actually authored, the TTK in Bicep isn't going to necessarily help you, because the code we generate may not be the same as the code that you've written in Bicep. But in terms of what does the code do, so if you're using like a secure string and outputting that, the TTK will catch things like that. And that's a reflection, a direct reflection of your Bicep code. So you can still use the TTK on the ARM templates generated by Bicep. It's just some of those errors may be relevant and some may not, as we kind of update TTK to work with Bicep natively. There's a bunch of backlog items. There's always a bunch of backlog items. There's some select ones that we're focusing on for the next 3 to 6 months that are worth calling out. We want to increase the Key Vault reference parameter limit. So some of you are hitting the amount of Key Vault secrets you can pass into a template. We're going to start allowing any nested deployment to any other scope. So today, there are frankly some weird arbitrary restrictions on where you can create nested deployments. We're going to get rid of all those. And if you have the rights to create a deployment at a scope, we will let you do that from a template. The third one, there's a bunch of what we call execution graph bugs, where basically functions are called before they should be or when they should not be. So the reference function, I'm sure many of you have experienced this, it fires too fast. It fires at the beginning of the template deployment instead of in the middle or wherever that resource is being referenced. Some of the runtime functions, like the list functions, are called on false conditioned resources. So if the resource was not going to get deployed, we still call the function, and that can cause templates to fail. We want to fix all of those execution graph errors. They're really frustrating. They're totally our fault, so we're going to take care of them. And then the last one is to allow tenant scope deployments or tenant scope resources to be deployed at non-tenant scopes. So some of the new resource types, like subscriptions that is coming out soon, and management groups is the same story. They're tenant level resources, and most people don't have the rights to create deployments at the tenant scope. So it ends up that you really can't create these resources with templates. So we're going to allow you to create them in non-tenant scopes. There'll be a special syntax that you can add to do that. We're going to get all the deployments data in Azure Resource Graph. That'll help you query deployments data really quickly. That'll help us query deployments data really quickly. We have some nicer kind of user experience plans for viewing deployments that depend on the data being in Resource Graph. Stacks, I'll leave this for Brian to unpack further, but basically making the lifecycle management easy. And then there are some enhancements for template and resource group visualization coming in the portal. You may have seen some of it already, helping you view resources in the custom template deployment experience, and also being able to take a resource group and instead of just seeing a flat list, being able to get a visualization of the resources and their dependencies. So that can be helpful as well. I think this is, yes, Angel, this is you.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. I'll be quick with this. Hi, everybody. So what you're seeing here is a learning path for ARM templates. And our goal with this learning path is to be able to break down into different modules a zero to hero experience with regards to learning how to author ARM templates. So at the beginning, it's meant to teach someone the bare bones what ARM template file is, and they'll be deploying an empty ARM template file all the way to at the end dealing with more advanced complex features of ARM templates such as deployment scripts, as well as creating full-on development and production environments. We already have 2 out, and I'm going to drop the links in the chat for those 2 right now. And there are 4 more that are slated to be done by October 15th at the latest. In the learning path, you'll be accumulating experience points as well as badges and trophies, which is something that you can then have for your own resume and all of that. But the main thing that I'd like to get feedback on here is for the modules are broken down. 1 and 2 are beginner, 3 and 4 are intermediate, 5 and 6 are advanced. And if you feel there are some concepts that are missing in each of these tiers, please feel free to get to me directly. And I would love to know if there's anything that we could maybe include in a further module or into the existing ones as well. Thanks.
All right, so deployment stacks. So I'm going to go quickly. We're running a little bit short on time. This first slide is just about the concept again. So this really hasn't changed since the last time we've talked about it, but if you weren't there, think of a deployment stack as a collection of resources that share the same life cycle. So prior to the stack concept, you had a template. Template could be deployed to a resource group. That was your life cycle. That was your container. That was your group. With deployment stacks, you can now spread that across resource groups. So you can have resources in separate resource groups. You can have them in different subscriptions. And all of those things can be in the same stack. And now that you have that grouping, what are some things that you want to do on it? So you can think of, I want to delete the entire stack. So I want to do a single delete gesture, have it go across, find all those resources and delete them. I may want to lock them. I can also think of update operations or things like detecting drift. In the future, we'll have rollback. So all of those things kind of come into play. The main thing to think about here, if you want to go to the next one, Alex, is that the template is what defines the stack. So you have a template today that can deploy across scopes. That's going to define the stack. So when you put the template or you put the deployment stack resource, it will require a template as part of the body, and you can kind of see that below. And that's going to define the stack or the resources that are in your stack. And so as a resource, you can create that imperatively or declaratively, either way. And then also think of it's a resource, so I could create a deployment or a template that has multiple stacks in it, even though the stack behaves a little bit like a template. So it's important to kind of wrap your head around that concept. But if you think of a stack as just another resource, and that resource has some particular behaviors, then it's a little bit easier. And now you'll be able to kind of plug that into anywhere in the platform and then be able to use it the way that you would expect. One of the key differences we're going to have with this type of template deployment is the mode is going to change a little bit. So if you think of the incremental complete mode today, doesn't always work the way you want it to, and we're going to try to improve on that. So we'll have 2 options for the mode. One of them is we're going to call it purge, and this is going to delete the resource from the stack, and it's also going to delete it from Azure. And the other one is just kind of a detach. Not sure what we'll call that yet, but it's the option to update your stack, remove a resource from the management of that stack, and then leave it intact in Azure. So if you had, say, for example, you had data that was part of a stack and you wanted to remove it from management of the stack, but you wanted to archive the data. So it would take it out of the purview of the stack, and now you could actually go do what you need to do with it. And then there's also, not shown here in this snapshot, but you'll be able to lock a stack. So when you deploy it, you can lock it. Think of the read-only delete locks that kind of exist today, and that's going to lock the individual resources. So even though they may be spread across scopes, the resources themselves can still share the same lock. And then, of course, you have the ability to kind of get around that lock if you have an operational emergency. So you can provide a principal that will be excluded from the lock. You can also exclude actions. So if you think of the way that's done on Blueprint assignments today, that'll be the same idea in the deployment stack. And then on the get of a stack, looks very similar to the put. The key parts of this are, and this is kind of a key part of the stack itself, is the two things that are circled there at the bottom. So there's the list of managed resources. So after that template is deployed, the RP will go through and it'll keep track of the resources that were deployed in that stack. And now those are the resources that are under management of the stack. So if you ever need to see that, you ever need to troubleshoot something, you can see those resources. And then that's also how some of the other functionality will be applied to it. And then there's also a snapshot ID. So when you put a stack or you create a stack, we're going to create a snapshot, which is a child resource, but it looks almost identical to the stack itself, or it actually will in the case of the latest stack. So you want to go to the next one, Alex. And if you look at the get on the stack itself, again, it's going to look the same as the previous slide, but there will be multiple versions of this, or multiple snapshots, as you will, that you'll be able to look at and then kind of assess or do some operations on the history of that stack. So if you think of things like, I want to detect a drift between the state in Azure and the last version of the snapshot or last version of the stack, you can do that. If you wanted to look at the drift between two versions or two different snapshots, you could do that. If you wanted to look at the diff between the live Azure and then an arbitrary version of the snapshot, you could do that. So we'll provide some of that functionality as the stack resource matures. And then the last thing is just to kind of help you guys get, this is still in progress, so we want you to think about some of these things and kind of help us refine the concepts. So snapshots and versioning, is the name good? Is the fact that we're automatically creating one of these things going to cause problems, including the names? And then also just like, how do you think about reasoning over those things? So if you go and you do a get on the snapshot resource itself, we can give you all of them. There's some sequence implied in that. And so thinking through things like that. Another one is the last template deployment defines a stack, or a template deployment defines a stack. So if you have a large stack and you have a lot of resources in that template, that's what defines your stack. If you need to update an individual resource in that, or you need to remove an individual resource in that, you have to deploy the entire template again. And we know there's some challenges in ARM with large template deployments and the idempotency of individual resources. So we want to keep that in mind. But that's really the right way to go through this. If you think of the way the API works in Azure, that's the right way to define it. If we've got other problems in that, we need to go fix those in the platform because they're going to cause problems in other places. And so what it really means is that the life cycle is key here. So think of the life cycle of those resources. When do I want to deploy them together? When do I want to deploy them separately? And separate your stacks and your templates into that life cycle. And so you can deploy multiple stacks in a single deployment. The locks are not inherited. And I can also have a stack that deploys another stack. So it's another scenario. They're not inherited. It applies to its own stack. So think of those things as you go through those scenarios and kind of give us feedback as we go through it. We'll have more to share on this in the next couple months. We hope to have something that you can kind of get your hands on by the end of the year. Fingers crossed, but that's what that looks like today. So that's it for stacks.
Hey, Brian, there were just a couple of stacks related questions, and then we can do the open mic as well. From stacks, to summarize, I think one question is, how is this different from complete mode, and how should we think about that? Second one is, I think when people are thinking about dev test, prod, pre-prod, should they start thinking about stacks as being that environment that you manage? And the third one is around when will we announce more about stacks or talk about it? Is it going to be Ignite? Is it going to be later? So those were three questions that.
Okay. So if I don't remember all three of them.
So first one is complete mode.
Yeah, complete mode and purge. So the template deployment and the mode of a stack are not related. And so there's probably two aspects of this. Complete mode today, when you do a complete mode today, anything that's not in your template and not in the scope of that template deployment, when it's a resource group, and this is the way it was originally thought of, if it's not in that scope, it's going to be removed from that scope once the deployment is finished. That's the way the complete mode works. Purge is going to be largely the same, except when you cross scopes, we will start to remove those resources. But we also only are removing the resources not within the scope, but that were in the previous deployment of the stack. So if you have a version 1 of a stack, it defines 3 resources. And then you deploy version 2 of that stack, and it only has 2 resources in it. Only one resource is going to be removed. Even if you had 100 other resources in your subscription and that stack was deployed at subscription scope, the only resource that's going to be removed is the delta between your version 1 and your version 2. So it will clean up what it's done. It's not going to go clean up another mess, if that's kind of the scenario. The other aspect of this is the template deployment itself. The mode that's on the template deployment is only controlled by the stack. So you couldn't deploy a stack, deploy it in one mode, and then have a nested deployment within the template that deploys in another mode. And if you think about it today, you actually can't put a complete mode on a nested deployment. So those are going to be separate. You won't be able to interchange them when you deploy a stack. So hopefully that clarifies things. Sorry, Satya, what was the second one?
The second one is, should stacks be thought of as an environment? So would I use a stack to deploy my production environment and manage that, then my pre-production environment and my dev test environment?
I think it depends a little bit on, so you could certainly do that. It depends a little bit on how you think of, how do I go from prod to, or from test to prod? So if I had kind of a blue-green thing where I always had completely separate environments, then stacks would be a perfect fit for that. But if you have a scenario where you're actually mixing resources, or you actually do this transition, or you think of testing in production with web apps, that type of scenario, you'd have to be careful about the makeup of the stack, because you could actually remove the resource from one stack and then also kind of remove that from Azure. And today it would actually remove it from the other stack, and you'd end up with a dangling reference. We know that this is a problem. We're not quite sure how we're going to solve it yet. But today we're just going to say this is the way it would behave. This is what's going to happen. So be careful when you kind of go down that route. And then the last one, kind of like when we're going to talk more about it, probably the next session we have, if that's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be November. We hope to have something that's going to be out by the end of the year that you can get your hands on. May drift into first quarter next year, but actually getting this working along with template specs so you can really see what the thing looks like, and then of course kind of give us feedback on what's working and not working with it.
Excellent, thanks, Brian. So now we'll do open mic. I think the ask is if you could use the virtual raise your hand if you have a question, and then come off mute, introduce yourself, and then give another person a turn. I'm hoping you guys can use the raise your hand feature.
Marius is first.
Sorry, I was just saying that we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah.
So if there are some unattended questions, then Satya, is it okay if they can email you directly?
Of course.
Okay. Sounds good. Let's proceed.
Marius, do you want to come off mute?
Yes, thank you. So I had a question on in regards to resources that are deployed by the stack in other subscriptions. What happens when the subscription in which the deployment stack resides is disabled or deleted afterwards? How does that impact the other resources that are in it?
It wouldn't impact the other resources. I will be honest and say I don't know if we know what the impact on the stack itself would be.
I think we would unlock we would remove the denies probably. I think that's what we have to do for blueprints, but we haven't figured all that out just yet, Marius.
Okay. So this is what I just wanted to raise this kind of dependencies cross subscriptions, because this is where it becomes sensitive, I would say. Okay, thank you.
That's why we have you guys here.
Mike?
Yes, I'll just voice a question that Rick had put in the chat. How are you planning on, or if you guys thought about this in the future, of how is this going to be visualized, or how will this be surfaced up in the portal, or where do you see it appearing?
With stacks?
Yes.
We haven't given a ton of thought of what that will look like. It's probably going to be its own resource and its own blade. Like you think of deployments today, and they're kind of spread across, or they belong to their scope. So conceptually, you'll have your own resource for a stack. We can browse stacks kind of like you do with blueprint assignments, and then be able to kind of jump to the deployments that were created by that stack.
Okay. He went on to include, like, will it connect into the app insights and the app map and things like that?
And haven't thought that far ahead.
Thank you.
Ryan? Ryan, you're on mute if you're talking. Ryan, we cannot hear you. Anybody else while Ryan figures out if he can get off mute?
One of the questions that was in the chat, I'll just respond to rather than type it. The mode on stacks is, so Stan asked why was it different? It's different largely because of the scope being a little bit broader and not kind of having the same capabilities to it. So the fact that we don't actually have another grouping concept, it really just becomes a delta between what was the previous definition and what's the current definition. And so those are the kind of the main things that are driving that difference. And part of it is, I think, when complete mode was thought of and when it was implemented, you really could only do deployments at resource group scope. You couldn't do anything else. And so as deployments grew up so that you could go across scopes, that concept didn't really mature with it.
And Ryan is off mute.
Yay.
So it's only a really interesting one from my view, but would it be possible to have a single pane that looks at every single type of deployment? So I could see what's going on at a tenant level, a management group level, subscription level, and resource group level.
Good question. So we had that item on our roadmap to get the data into Resource Graph. One of, if not the main reason we're doing that, is to be able to create a UX like you're describing, Ryan, where you can view all your deployments in one place, filter by scope, search through the names, whatever you would want to do.
Good. Thanks.
And we are at time. So like Priya had mentioned, if you have additional questions, you can obviously email all of us and we will get back to you offline. But thank you as always for joining us. Thank you as always for all of your help, for all the blog posts, for all the feedback. Look forward to the next call with you all.
Thank you so much, Alex, Satya, Brian, and everybody else from the product group team. Super valuable. Thank you again.
See ya.
See you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.